Good morning. This is Mona, and this is my morning view. I just bumped my shoulder into the spindle and caused the camera to have an earthquake. All right. Today, it is Fall Edition 2025, Memory Monday. Memory Monday. It's about the 28th, I guess, somewhere around there. So you just look at the calendar and it says Monday, and you'll know exactly when it is. Fall 2025, towards the end of the month. The Saturday, I believe, is like the 4th. So, just figure it out. I should look at the calendar before I start these so that you know exactly where I'm at. It's really basically to align the short from YouTube with the video here. So speaking about YouTube, go ahead and when you are done listening to this live, go to YouTube, Mona E. Harrison. It's different than my Facebook profile. And so my Facebook profile was set up so that people would know me even from my previous name before I was married. And so that way they would be able to find me. And so it's been there for a very long time. So I think anybody who is actually searching for me has found me already. So anyways, I'm not too concerned, but I'm a little too tech lazy to change it. So in the meantime, we set up a YouTube for these, and it is under Mona E. Harrison. So go to Mona E. Harrison. You will see my white hair, my beautiful face, and you will know you are in the right spot. And when you get there, subscribe, hit notifications. And on Facebook and on YouTube, don't forget to like, share those things that you find valuable, and comment. Like the comments. Keep them coming. A lot of people send me messages on the back end because they don't want their comment in public to the social media. So I respect people's way they like to watch me. I have a lot of followers, a whole lot more than what have subscribed, a whole lot more than like or comment or share, because that's where they are. They like to be ghost watchers, and that's fine with me. All right. They when they see me, they tell me that they've watched me, and they've watched me regularly, and because of that, I am grateful for them, because this message is for them. If they find it valuable, if they find it worthy enough to watch, then it is for them. But I absolutely would love comments and shares and likes, because it's good for the algorithm. And the more the algorithm improves, more people can watch. All right, so done with the commercial. Memory Monday. I was thinking, there was a conversation I was having with someone at church, and our sermon at church yesterday had to do with, the quadrants of our those places where neural pathways have triggers, flags that point us to the right pathway to do, and our brain has made these super highways. And I've had multiple videos on this subject for the last 8 years. I've been doing this for about 10, but for about 8 I've been talking about neural pathways. I've been talking about transformation, and in the with the vehicle of peace. And so I've done a lot of research on the psychology and the physiology. I can't speak today, and the biblical concepts as they combine to prove what I'm teaching is correct. And so the pastor was actually talking about these things yesterday. And he was using from a book, I don't remember the name of the book, Nope, don't remember the name of the book. He mentioned it, and if anybody would want to put that book in on the comments, that would be handy, because I probably will not go back to do that. So it was talking about when we're growing up, that there are different areas where our brain parks itself because of our experiences. Because the experience comes in, our right brain analyzes it with emotion. Emotion. It's not the analytical part of your brain. It's the emotional part of your brain. And so, you know, that emotion categorizes it a certain way. And there are people that live in this quadrant called the jungle, right? And they tend to be very needy people. And then you have, and there's other attributes. You know, it's not, I'm just pulling out one to go on with the story. And then there's that person that is in the desert. And it's like, ain't nobody coming. Can do this on my own, because it's just, you know, if you want it done right, do it yourself, right? How many times do we hear that and say that? Those desert people. Don't worry, I can relate to that one. And then you have the war zone people. The war zone where you just didn't know what was going to happen. You never knew what was going to happen. One minute you're needy, and one minute you're like, no. I don't need nobody, you know. And it's this back and forth. And I remember, and the fourth one is the pastor. The pastor is, you know, Psalms 23. He leads you by still pastures. You can find rest. You can rely on the shepherd. Okay, so there's these four spaces. And I was, as I'm sitting there during the sermon, I'm thinking about these four spaces, and it's like really related to the desert right now in my life. And of course I have my hearing aids on, and they're making noise, so hopefully it's not super loud for you. So I think I'll just stay down here where there's a little bit of buffer between the noise and my hearing aids. So, and you all know that when noise starts, my brain starts to shut down. I don't know why that is. I'm not sure, but it happens. So I'm going to try to get through this without sounding like a bumbling fool, because that's what I feel like when the noise starts and I start to not be able to think my thoughts, because the noise fills my brain and it's louder than my thoughts. So where was I at? Oh, that I could relate to this desert individual. And then he started talking about the war zone individual. And I sat there and I realized, before I came to Christ, I was this war zone. I was that space where war zone was it, right? And it took a while to get out of the war zone. And so I ended up in the desert. Part of the reasons why I ended up in the desert after I was a Christian, because, see, what happens is, when you come to Christ, and through sanctification, things start to transform in your mind. You start to have sanctification in your life, and so you start doing things differently because you want to do things differently. And so you come up against these things that are very comfortable to you, because that is how your brain has said the way you should go. This is how you should react to this or react to that, instead of stopping. I've shown you the stop sign before. Stopping and looking at the situation. How would Christ want me to respond to this? How would, if I was a mature Christian, how would that look like? What would that look like? And so instead of going from the war zone over to the pastor, I ended up creating new thoughts in the mind by the responses of things that were going on in life and how Christians or the church reflected to me how to respond. And so there's this one area where it was the death of my father. My father was in the hospital. He was on life support, and they were waiting for all the members of the family to come to his side. And that same day, our car broke down. Our car broke down, and we ended up being without a vehicle to go to the airport. And I was searching for anybody who could take me to the airport. And nobody would take me to the airport. At the time, I belonged to a pretty large church down south, in the Bible Belt, by the way. And I couldn't get a ride. I had no friends that could take me to the airport for whatever reason. I can't even tell you what those reasons were. So I realized that I can't rely on anyone else. And so, after the fourth day, where my husband worked in G5 in the military at Fort Campbell, he said that he told him that, I couldn't get to the airport. We didn't have a vehicle. And they told him, take the car that belongs to G5. Take the car and get your wife to the airport. Now, I don't know if that was something that military people could just do. Take the car. But it came from his commander. So I would think that it was okay to do this. So anyways, he took me to the airport, where I got to California. And I did not know that they were waiting for everybody to be there to unplug him, my father. So there was a lot of things that took place that, there was a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. I was the only one that didn't get a time alone with my dad to talk. And so it solidified in my brain that I can't get help from people. Put me over to the desert place. So once I transitioned out of the war zone, I went to the desert. Still wasn't in the pasture yet. And I realized that I still had desert tendencies. There was when my mother passed away, and I was doing soundboard at the time. I would not be able to do soundboard today. Has nothing to do with that. It's that tech stuff in my head that I got to get past. Yes, I still struggle with things. I'm not perfect, and I'm not completely healed. But I'm working towards that. So, and if you're watching somebody who's perfect, hint, they're not perfect. They just have a good PR. They have a great G5. So their marketing team is awesome. And they're very tech savvy. Or they have a marketing team that is. So anyways, coming from this imperfect individual who's still working towards more sanctification in their life and still kind of stuck in this desert stage, right? And just being vulnerable here to you all. The thought is this, with my memory of all of that going on. The things that solidify these things in our brains is what goes on around us, right? What our brain is processing through our emotions at the time when we're like less than 25 years old, or you know, you're going through an emotional state. So if you're going through an emotional state like death, like the death of my father, like the death of my mother, those emotional states, the death of my brother and my sister, and my sister-in-law, when I was in that toxic work environment. Even though you're over 25, if you're in an emotional state, it's hard to hook on to the logical thing because your emotions have your attention at the moment, right? They have their attention at the moment. And then you create these pathways. Especially if some of these pathways have already been driven on. But it solidifies them as the path to go, right? We don't all go down Route 66 anymore. We take Route 80. So, the thing of it is, my thought was, if the church was the church. Remember, the church is not a building. The church is not a building. It's the people. The people are the church. And if the church would be the church, then some of these hurts and some of these pains wouldn't be solidified. That we can't rely on the people in the church to be there for us if we need somebody to be there for us. No consolation. No helping hand. Nothing. Just a desert. Or worse yet, that it's wishy-washy. You don't know what you're going to come up with. And you're in the war zone. Or in the jungle. Where you're always searching through the dangers. The Lord brings us to the pasture. Brings us to the pasture. He leads us beside still waters. So we rely on Jesus. But the church are his hands, his feet, his spokesperson. Where is the church when there are so many needs out there? You know, there was a time in where the church is the ones that took care of the needs, right? Even in Old Testament times, You tithe a 10% to the Lord. You tithe 10% towards the temple. Kind of like so that you could get to the temple during your feasts and ceremonies that was mandatory for male Jewish people to go to the temple on these occasions. And so you needed to have provision in order to get to the temple. So there was a 10% tithe basically to your savings account in order to go worship the Lord at the temple. And then there was a 3% tithe to help the poor. Now, if everybody's tithing 3% to go to the poor, you didn't need government to do it. Right? And so where the church has failed in the United States, I can't say for the rest of the country, but I mean for the rest of the world, but for the United States, where the church has failed in providing for the needs of people, the government has stepped in. But once you have government stepped in, then there's a heavy burden that is laid on the people. Because that's what government does. It's just like when God was telling the people of Israel that if they have a king, he's going to take your young men for war. He's going to take your prophets and and tax you to a burdensome amount, and then he will take your daughters to be servants. It was burdens. That's what the government does. Burdens. And it became a larger government helping the people with their burdens placed on top of their backs. And then we put our hands up. Not our responsibility anymore. The government will take care of them. The church failed. The church failed in meeting the needs. The church failed meeting the needs of counseling. So people go to the world. A lot of it government backed. Where is the church today? Remember, it's not a building. It's us. It's us. What am I doing as the church to be there for another brother or sister? To prevent that church hurt that people have. The building didn't hurt the people. Who hurt the people? What can we do to make up for what we've created? We've created some neural pathways in the brains of people that cause them to react a certain way. Now, that's not what the sermon was about. The sermon was about us. But sometimes we got to get our eyes off of ourselves and look to others. But not in judgmentalism, but in how can we help? With compassion, with empathy, with sympathy. What can we do? What is practical that we can do to help them see that they're not in a jungle, that they're not in a desert, that they're not in a war zone? If I figure out what the name of this book is, I will pop it into the comments. I didn't read the book. The pastor was referring to the book. But that's where he got that grid line. And by the way, I'm not even giving the sermon that he gave. It was about the transformation of your mind. And I will talk more about that because that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years, talking about transforming, probably 9, the transformation of the mind. Because that's what God wants. And that transformation of the mind is getting off that superhighway, as my pastor called it. I always just call it a well-worn path, but superhighway might be more the correct title for it. Where are you at? Where are you at? I wish I could tell you all the little attributes of all the different little quadrants, but I can't. There was little things that popped into my brain that I remembered. And so while I was sitting there, I saw where I came from and where I am and where I need to go. It is a continual, lifelong journey. We don't just arrive, but once we're in the pasture, it won't be as complicated a life. I think that's the best way of putting it. It won't be as complicated a life because I'm never going to sit there and tell you that your life will be rosy because that's not what we're called, to have a cushy, rosy life. But also remember that roses have thorns. So you may be pricked from time to time. And that is because we live in a fallen world. And the fallen world produces thorns and weeds. And we have to pull out those weeds and thorns in order to grow a garden. Because that's what we're called to do. So if we're called to grow a garden, we have to maintain the garden. We have to prepare the garden. So our life is going to have thorns and weeds in it. That's what it is. But we look toward that garden. We have hope and trust that the garden will produce. And so, with that, comes the transforming of the mind. Just like we're transforming that plot of ground into a beautiful garden. All right. That is it. Blessings, everybody. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow for Tips Tuesday. Have a great day. Bye.